Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings you the news, the Constitution, and the complete analysis to you each month. Good evening. My name is James Barrett, and tonight with Mark Malachowski, we're here on three exciting subjects. Mark, what are we starting with tonight?
Well, the first thing we're going to talk about this evening is 1031 exchanges, and this is a tax issue that has to do with capital gains.
Well, I'm going to ask you about this. I have some knowledge on it, but why don't you explain what is a IRS 1031 exchange?
Okay, now what happens when you're, it's usually with real property here, and when you sell a property, you have to be very careful not to take the money out of escrow until you see if you have a good candidate for a 1031 exchange. Because if you take the money out of escrow and it actually goes into your name, you've lost your opportunity to use a 1031.
Yeah, but isn't a 1031 only apply to like commercial properties, your second home, and things like that? It doesn't apply to your normal home that you would be living in.
Well, generally you're talking about investment properties, okay? And what happens is, particularly right now, because in our last segment we're going to be talking about Obamacare and the 7% Obama tax on capital gains. And that could have been repealed a few weeks ago, and that didn't make it through the Congress. So right now, Obama moved capital gains up from 15 to about 22% or something in there, right? So,
yes.
And also you also have a 3.3% tax for the California Franchise Tax Board. So you're talking in the area about 25%. So let's say you have a property, $10 million, okay? So $2.5 million of that is going to go to capital gains. You're going to lose that to the federal government, right?
Well, the problem with the 1031 is it's got a lot of restrictions. And the problem lies on you have to identify your property ahead of time that you're going to exchange. And normally it's like a commercial, say a commercial building. You have to identify a like property that you're going to take the money you get for the sale of that commercial property and then roll it into the new property, and you effectively don't get taxed on the benefit of the sale of your original property. Now, the problems are timelines, because first you have to identify the property almost immediately while you're in the process, and then you have 45 days to commit to that property, and you have up to 106 months for your final conclusion and the close of escrow on the second property. Now, the problem with this is, if you don't do that, you lose automatically and you fall into the capital gains tax.
Okay, so let's look back at kind of the philosophical reason that they put this in the tax code, if there's any reason at all for tax code.
Taxes.
But what did Leote said 2,000 years ago? Taxes are not raised for the benefit of the tax, that's for sure. But the idea is that you want the investor class, people who are investing, to put the money back into the economy. You don't want them just to take their money and sit on it. So what this does is gives you a chance to defer that capital gain if you're willing to reinvest it. Now, why is that would scare people? Of course, anytime you invest things, you're taking another risk. Instead of taking the money and saying, okay, I've got this money, I can hold on to it. Anytime you buy another property, you're taking a risk that the value of that property will go down, or a lot of things could happen. So this is to encourage people to reinvest the money that they're taking out of the profit they made on their last property. And the idea is that, you know, from an operational standpoint, they have what they call an accommodator. You want to put that money that you made from your last property sale into the accommodator, and then you have 45 days after that closing of the first property to identify your new property. Now, if you don't find another property, you can take the money out of the accommodator and you'll
fall under the capital gains tax.
You'll fall under the capital gains. You won't lose
without
the money.
penalty.
Well, there is a slight fee. You're in a $800 fee or $1,000, somewhere in that area.
For the accommodator.
For the accommodator to set it up. So your broker's going to make another $1,000 or something like that. But you can always pull the money back out. So you're not going to lose it. But if you take the money out of escrow before you put it in the accommodator, then you've lost your opportunity.
Yeah,
that's what people don't understand.
Yeah, there's a finite window, and you can't be holding the money. That's the whole point. You can't let it come into your possession.
No, the broker holds it.
The broker holds it. You don't do anything with it.
As soon as you touch it, that's too late. It goes from the broker to the accommodator, from the accommodator into the new property. Now, there's things you can do with the money out of the accommodator. You can take out loans and match that and buy a bigger piece of property. Now, what your hope would be is to buy a piece of property partially with a loan, partially with the money you made that you're not going to get hit with that tax, and then you would try to get some return on that property. So if you were like renting retail spaces or a shopping center, you would have a return on your money, and hopefully that return on that money, the profit you're making off that property, that's an income property, is more than you're paying on your mortgage and interest, and so you're taking a couple % there.
Well, actually, there's an interesting couple of things. The 1031 has subsections A through H, and so there's a series of different transactions you can go through. But that's a lot more complicated. I think we would have to spend a lot of time on that. But the key points is you can't take any of the money out without losing the ability. And then the next point is you can actually buy a property, but the key point, it has to be a like property. You can't move from one type of commercial property to something that's completely different, because there's wording that says it's supposed to be like property. Now, there is one thing you can do. You can buy a property, another commercial property, for less, and then they have what's called the boot. And the boot, you can take the money out, and you only get your capital gains on the amount of money that's the boot.
Right.
Now, they don't call it the boot, but that's effectively what the generic term in the industry is. So you can actually benefit from a 1031 and get some cash out and paying less capital gains because you're only taking a percentage out, but still have the tax status and the savings by putting the rest of the money from your original sale into a property that costs less. So there's actually, you can kind of manipulate a little bit. But one thing you can't do is add money. You can never add money to your money and say, "Whoa, I want a higher tax bracket. I'm out of this."
Well, no, yeah, okay. So but also you can use loans to supplement your.
You can use loans
to supplement your next investment. Now, if the interest rates are low enough and you're saving enough on your going through your 1031 exchange, and you've got an income property that's producing some income, you can say, "Hey, look, I just made 25% here, and if you're picking up another 2%, per year on that for the next 5 or 10 years, and if you're dealing in a, like say if you're in a 5 to 10 million range, that comes to some real money."
Well, it does.
And so, it's really worth looking at. Now, the other issue is that you can't invest overseas. You've got to invest.
It's got to be, if it's in country, it's got to be in country.
It's got to be in the United States. You can't put it overseas. And even if it's a like investment, the states of the United States are so different that you can take a property that you're renting here with so many, like a quarter acre, and maybe buy 10 acres in Idaho to do the same kind of thing. So, and then maybe get a slightly less return, but take less of a risk. So there's a lot of things you can do even with like properties.
Well, that's interesting about like properties. The factor that because of the states, like in California, you can sell a property that's worth $1 million and you have $1 million net,
right,
and you take that money and roll it into the state of Tennessee, and
right,
you're gonna go from a quarter acre to the 10-acre deal.
That's what I'm saying.
But they still consider it a like property
right.
if it's an income generating property.
Well, and also, not only are you talking about like properties, but you can have like properties that have various degrees of risk and return too. So like say you're looking at professional buildings, that's one kind of risk. You're looking at retail buildings is another. Looking at agriculture is another type of risk. So there's different grades of risk depending on how rich you feel in your blood, or how
lucky do you feel?
How lucky do you feel? So even with like properties, you say, okay, this is a rental income property, and so you've got a fair amount of leeway there. And and sometimes you can go and say, when you're looking at your properties, I mean, the tricky part is this 45 days is going out searching for your property.
You should be looking at for your property before you even sell your first property.
Well,
it's kind of leaning in that direction.
A lot of people who do this, they do this all the time.
Right.
It's just something they do every other weekend, just because that's part of their business. But I mean, you can look at 3 different properties, or you can look at more, but you can't exceed twice your 1031 funds with the accommodator. So you can look at several different properties and identify these. And so you've got some time to decide, but you have to identify these three properties pretty quickly.
I think on that note, we'll leave this because actually it's very complicated. And I think we should move on to our next subject. What's our next subject tonight, Mark?
Okay, well, this is kind of a landmark situation. Is Neil Gorsuch is the new SCOTUS Supreme Court
number 9
justice. And Neil was, I guess, tested by fire, going through these things they call the murder boards, going through these interrogations because he, in Congress, was going to be very tough on him, and
the Senate
was being very tough on them, and the press and everybody was being very tough on him. He came from, I guess, a certain bank of judges that had been identified by a certain organization that was pretty conservative. So you had a lot of the liberals.
10th district.
Yeah, but I mean, but there was a group of people that said this is a set of judges that we like, and that kind of started a wildfire of dissent against him. So
well,
he knew he was going to face some opposition.
Yeah, well, the problem is, as you know, the Republican-dominated Senate during the last year of the Obama presidency denied Garland. Right. Justice Garland from having the opportunity to for a vote. And because even though there's the Biden rule, which said no president should be able to appoint a Supreme Court justice during the last year, and Biden, of course, used that during the Bush presidency, right, and which set up the Biden rule. Right. So now the Democrats have forgotten the Biden rule, even though Biden, the vice president, is the one that designed it. And they said, you must give Merrick Garland an up or down vote last year. So they didn't. In fact, the head of the Senate decided that I'm not going to give him a vote and didn't even have an interview with him. So this year, after January 20th, when the new president came in, and of course he nominated right off the list he gave everyone during his election process, he picked the first time a judge has been unanimously recommended by the ABA, every attorney board across the country. He was a intern under Justice White and Justice Kennedy.
He clerked for Kennedy.
He clerked for Kennedy and Justice White, 2 Supreme Court justices. Right. And
10 years on the, was he had 10 years in appeals?
Yes, he was in appeals, and he has over 212 decisions that he wrote himself, and they were all the ones that went to the Supreme Court were affirmed.
And you've also got to look at, if someone's a clerk for the Supreme Court, I mean, the clerks do a lot of work.
They do all the work.
They do, yeah. I don't want to say that because I have to go before
most of the work.
Because I have to go
part of the work.
Because I have to go before judges. But
all the time.
Clerks do a lot of the work.
Correct.
And so if you look at what Justice Kennedy said in his briefs and one thing or another, you got to say, okay, Neil probably wrote a fair amount of those, right?
Yes. So we can look at Kennedy as well, and White.
Yeah, you can look at those briefs, look at those, not necessarily the decisions so much, but at the briefs, right?
Right.
And say that's probably some of Neil's work there, too.
That's correct.
So, I mean, he has a huge record to look at, and, he's, I guess from the Midwest, so he's a little bit boring.
He's from Colorado.
Yeah, from the New York people and the California people don't like him because he's kind of boring. He's a boring guy, yeah.
Well, I want to add something here about Mr. Gorsuch. When he was nominated to get to the 10th Circuit, he was unanimously voted on by the Senate,
right,
which was in the control of the Democrats.
And now a lot of those senators voted against him.
And now the senators come out saying, what an evil man. But in fact, it was all about who recommended him, who nominated him.
Well, I think what there's a huge vision in the country, whether the Constitution is a written document that is a contract between the government and the people, or whether the Constitution is a living document that can kind of be changed based on whoever's in charge at the moment.
Neil's an originalist.
So there's a huge thing. Now, Scalia was very much a strict constitutionalist, very much originalist, died under pretty suspicious circumstances, to say the least.
Right before three major decisions, by the way.
No autopsy. Now, I'd say
we've covered this before.
But I mean, if Obama,
we should leave it alone tonight.
Okay. I'm just saying, somebody that important with no autopsy,
and no bodyguard. He's supposed to have a U.S. Marshal with him all the time. Oh, magically, he didn't have a U.S. Marshal that night. But anyway, the one night he mysteriously dies.
Very, very suspicious circumstances, I would say. An unfortunate passing. Kind of like Ted Stevens.
Oh, Ted Stevens. You mean the 60th vote with his replacement on the Obamacare. Yes.
Okay, so anyway, Gorsuch graduated from Columbia, Harvard, and Oxford, clerked for 2 Supreme Court justices, and did a stint at the Department of Justice. Highly regarded. And so what the Democrats did, or Schumer did, is said, well, we're going to filibuster the Supreme Court. Now, this has never been done in history, ever before. They've never, they had the ability to filibuster the Supreme Court, but Democrats.
But they always gave them a vote.
But Whigs, Republicans, whatever the parties ever were, it's never happened before. Now they said, oh, well, this is a tradition. Well, it's a tradition that never happened before, which I guess can be. And so Schumer said, well, we're gonna filibuster this. That kind of fell flat because he didn't have the votes in the Senate. So they did a pretty simple, they did the,
They did the nuclear option.
Well, that's not, no, it was the Reid option.
Yeah, well, hang on.
No, it was the Reid option because Reid is the one who said, look, we've got all these federal judges who really believe that the Constitution is a living document.
Living document.
And that basically the law is whatever we say it is.
Today.
Yeah, and well, whatever we've been paid to say it is. And so that's when they did the first thing where they said, we're going to get rid of filibuster.
Harry Reid, when he led the Senate, said, because you're not letting President Obama's judges get into the circuits, that we're gonna eliminate the rule for all judges except for the Supreme Court judges. So funny enough, when the Democrats said we're not going to vote, we're going to pull the filibuster, which no one's ever done, regardless of what Mr. Schumer said over and over again, it's been done all through history.
No, it's never done before.
It's never been done.
Never done before.
And so what did McConnell do? Well, we're just going to skip that rule. That rule's out the window, and now it's just an up or down vote.
What he did, he enforced the Harry Reid bill.
Yeah.
And so the Harry Reid rule. So the Harry Reid is the one who came up with this, and so. I mean, these things in Congress, as there's always a pendulum swing from one side to the other. And if one side changes a rule, well, you got to expect that the next time you need that rule, it's not going to be there.
It may not be your rule.
It's not going to be there. So, and as far as conservatives go, Neil Gorsuch is pretty moderate as far as conservatives go. And probably more moderate than Scalia was.
Well, that's the thing. Scalia was stricter on all of his decisions.
Well, I also think that Scalia was probably more outspoken.
Yeah.
And I think Neil is a little more diplomatic. If you listen to what he says and how he handles himself, he's a much more reserved fellow.
Yeah.
And he attracts a lot less attention, whereas Scalia really had no problem coming right out and stating things in pretty stark terms.
The interesting part is that Justice Gorsuch, is 49 years old, which means, given the fact that Justice Ginsburg is 80-something. He's got a few years to go on the bench. And so the idea that...
As long as he doesn't go to any of these parties down in Texas.
He always brings his U.S. Marshals with him, and I think he'll be okay. As long as you bring the Marshals with you, and there's at least one outside your door, there won't be any needles in the night.
Yeah, needles in the night.
But the good thing about this is that... a new president has the right to appoint the justices he wants to appoint.
Well, I would say if you look at, this appointment, it's a very moderate appointment. I think that Schumer made a huge political mistake by doing the filibuster because
yes, he did.
Because now that rule's gone.
That rule's gone.
And
what happens next time?
And so basically now Trump's in the position where he can do a more right-wing justice. Because this was a pretty moderate justice
compared to what he could have done.
Well, oh yes, and so Schumer kind of threw this thing down, and I think that was a error. But I think maybe he was doing it maybe as an emotional reaction more than as a thought out technique.
Actually, what he had to listen to the far left base.
Yeah, drum up the base.
And I think on that we have to think about one thing: the next judge that's appointed, there won't be any filibuster. It'll be
there's no filibuster.
Bung, 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 you're on.
Right.
And if that happens to be...
Well, it kind of depends, but I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. In 2 years, the Congress may change. The Senate may change in 2 years.
Well, let's wait and see.
So
but on that note, what is our third topic tonight, Mark?
Okay, here we're going to talk about something. We're going to talk about medical insurance. And medical insurance is kind of a shared risk pool when people say, okay, if some huge thing happens, some terrible thing, I'm going to put money aside and we'll have other people put in a shared risk pool. That's what you call insurance. And hopefully it never happens. But if it does, if a huge catastrophe happens, then I'll have money set aside to handle that catastrophe. So that's the principle of insurance. Now, what happened when you kind of socialize insurance, like they did in Russia and they did in Hungary? Like I've been in the hospital in Hungary, and you're waiting in line behind 100 people, and the doctor sees you.
Well, what happens if your arm's hanging
well,
off
that's
and there's blood shooting out?
You're there 15 days.
You're in line.
And then they say the doctor.
You got to take a ticket?
No, the doctor says, well, you're going to die, which is always right, because you're always going to die. But then what you do, go to the front of the line, and this was, of course, 20 years ago, and you give them $100 bills, and all of a sudden, whoop, you got good care. So socialized medicine works great as long as you can bribe the doctor.
Right.
But socialized medicine is a disaster. I mean, they have socialized medicine in Canada. Everyone loves it. But they need a heart operation. They fly to the United States.
Yeah, well, I keep hearing this. I keep hearing how great Canada is. But that's great if you have a cold.
Right.
But if you have to have a major surgery now, people come to a different country.
Yeah, people
and in
fly
fact, even people from here, they fly to like Thailand and countries that have 5-star hotels as hospitals, where you have the top surgeons because there's no medical malpractice. But let's draw it back here.
So what happened? They decided, like, basically, the last administration did kind of a kickback scheme. I think they made $5 billion on a computer program you could have sold for $500,000, and it was a $5 billion here, $10 billion here, $13 billion here. A lot of money kind of went to the ruling family, to Obamacare. It went to the this kind of like these Ponzi scheme, kind of like these
health networks.
Well, the computers, right?
Yeah.
The computers, and there was like friends that went to college with Michelle, and so.
Well, that's the woman out of Canada.
Yeah, billions and billions and billions disappeared, and the people who were paying their medical insurance, their thing went up 3 times, and the people who went in for the socialized insurance realized that their deductibles were so high that they'd have to be run over by a truck to use the insurance. And then everyone else was getting fined, and then they just tripled and quadrupled and
well, they never collected those fines.
No, but they quintupled the IRS. Well, they hired more and more IRS agents. But the funny thing, instead of working at Obamacare, most of the IRS agents spent most of their time fixing the election and harassing people. But anyway, so socialized medicine taking over 1/6 of the economy. I think I did the calculation. The Obamacare, if you project it out, would cost, you could put dollar bills back and forth to the moon 1 trillion times. I mean, for the cost overruns, I mean, it's just like huge cost over, and it was all embezzled money. And so that's due to collapse on the 21st. And so what Trump did, he came in, he said, well, I'll try to fix this, which is an unfixable thing, because an embezzlement scheme, a Ponzi scheme, how do you fix an embezzlement scheme? It's very hard. But anyway, he said he'd do it, and then the Democrats said, oh no, we're not going to cooperate. So I said, okay, we're going to let it go. And I think in a month or so, the Obamacare prices will skyrocket. The thing.
Well, it's by the end of April.
Yeah,
and the reason that we're talking about this tonight is because under Medicaid, people don't really have to do anything other than collect their free insurance, and of course, there's other things to go along with that. But there's been a recommendation in Congress to add a work requirement to receiving Medicaid. Now, that work requirement would mean if you're able-bodied, I mean, you're supposed to have some job to go along with your Medicaid. The problem is there's already about 58% of people on Medicaid do have some paid income in some format. But there is that other 42% that refuse to work.
Well, okay, so yeah, there is. Speaker Ryan pushed a work requirement for able-bodied adults enrolled in Medicaid. So they would, and to get, to have them do some work. And then that's probably why the Democrats didn't want that, because they should be voting, not working. And then they have something about some refundable tax credits towards low income. But that, like I said, that all died, and I think that may have just been the Republicans said, well, let it die and let the thing crash. Because what if we go save it? It's kind of like if a meat cleaver falls off the counter. Do you try to catch it? Let it
drop.
Let it go.
You get it out.
So I think that's, and so now talking about some secret Trump stuff and some secret GOP stuff, we're getting into some pretty pretty classified top security
Well, what are
stuff.
you trying to say, Mark?
And so, you know, Chief, I think we're going to have to go use the cone of silence.
The cone of silence.
The cone of silence.
Under what condition do we need to use the cone of silence?
Well, Chief, it's Government Rule 1040.
1040.
Yeah, and so we gotta use the cone of silence.
The cone of silence.
The cone of silence.
We have to go to the cone of silence.
Okay, there we go. So, Chief, I was coming to work today. I missed the train by that much.
But who's listening to us?
That much.
Why are you worried about discussing Hong Kong?
So the Obamacare Syndicate, or ACORN, started in 1991.
Acorn? What tree is that?
Uh-oh. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on a second.
We'll take off the cone of silence.
Oh, there goes the wait. 88. It's Max. Okay, how's it going? Oh, yeah. We were going to fly you back, but we missed it by that much.
You missed it by that
By
much?
that much. Okay, Agent 80. We'll have to talk later. I'm here with the Chief. Okay. So, anyway.
Well, I'm going to have to tell you the Obamacare that we just talked about, and thank you for informing me of how serious ACORN and Obamacare was.
Well, so here's and the reason we got to use the cone of science is because apparently Trump was wiretapped by Obama's stellar wind.
Stellar wind.
The stellar wind.
Would that be the woman that went before 5 TV shows right after Benghazi?
That wasn't like the summer wind. It's not. This isn't like. Yeah, this is not my buddy. You know, this is the stellar wind, and what the stellar wind means is that instead of getting a FISA warrant, this is so important and such an emergency that the executive branch says we're going to surveil these people now. Nobody really knows what wiretapping is anymore because there's no more dial-up phones, and no one even has shoe phones anymore.
So, nobody has a shoe phone.
Yeah,
they've been traded in for canvas and whatever else. I mean, there's just too many
So if
types.
you could call it eavesdropping or surveillance or hacking, but whatever it is, it's someone listening in onto a private conversation.
Should we be looking right now?
Well, we had the code of silence, and we had some problems with that. Okay, So anyway, Comey was before the Congress the other day, and he said, there was no wiretapping, there was no spying on Trump.
No spying.
Which was absolute perjury. And, but, you know, Obama people, because Comey's kind of like a lapdog for Hillary. And so, you know, if you look at Eric Holder, remember, and his TV show, I mean, you know, these people getting up and perjuring himself before Congress is old hat.
Well, you know what? I think we should go back to this in our next show. But for tonight, Mark, I will tell you, we are not going back to the cone of silence. No matter what you say, at any time, under any condition.
Wait a minute. I see what 88 says about that. Wait a minute.
You mean 99?
99. 88. The chief.
It's 88.
The chief